Okay, guys, as ever, the week just flies by, and we're very fortunate to have another amazing guest. We have Amy Berger, who, as some of you will know now, because I've been pushing the book at you, has partnered up with our good friend Dr Eric Westam to write a book about carbs. So that's pretty exciting, given what's going on at the moment in the zeitgeist. But I think what's really exciting about it is, you know, that I got into Tim Noakes and Eric Westman because of their voice. You know, I'm an audio thinker. I can hear the voice. It just seems to me like it's totally and utterly speaking the truth, integrity. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what? Amy's got one of those voices too. You're going to enjoy this. So without any further ado, let me just say a wee bit about her. She's an ex, or whatever you would call over there, a US Air Force veteran, although she looks pretty young to me. So she's a veteran of the Air Force, certified nutritionist specialist, but has a master's in human nutrition, which is very powerful. I've heard her in a number of other podcasts, particularly her work on Alzheimer's, before she's now got involved with Dr. Eric Westam in the new book. I've already got the book lined up on my Kindle. It's next to be read. Can't wait. So here we go, guys. Here's Amy Berger. What a treat we're into. Welcome to our little thing we do, Amy. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
It's fantastic. So, Amy, what we tend to do is get our guests to share a wee bit about their backstory, how they got into what they're doing, and then we can hear about the book and maybe some other things, yeah?
Right. So my story is really similar to a lot of other people that get into doing low carb and ketogenic oriented nutrition. And I was heavier in the past. I was overweight and I never had morbid obesity. I wasn't quite that large, but I was heavier despite doing what I thought were all the right things, despite eating a low fat diet and healthy cereal in the morning with skim milk and, exercising regularly. And the weight wouldn't budge. And I was fortunate in that I didn't really have any health problems. I was just carrying extra weight. But I have a family history of type 2 diabetes, obesity, cancer, and stroke. And so there's no doubt in my mind now that if I hadn't found low carb when I did, I would be well on the way to some of those conditions, if not already be living with them. But I actually stumbled upon the Atkins diet. And this was, I've been eating low carb almost 20 years. It's been a long time, and not always strictly ketogenic, but always some type of lower carbohydrate. Yep. And my entry into this was Atkins. And I joke, but it's not really a joke, that I'm a coffee lover. And the first time I put heavy cream in my coffee instead of milk, it was so rich and so luxurious. And I just thought, am I going to feel my arteries clogging? Is the heart attack going to happen immediately, or is it going to take time? But of course, it worked. Getting rid of the carbohydrate from my diet helped me lose the weight, helped me keep it off all these years. And after being in and out of a lot of jobs that I didn't find fulfilling and satisfying, it occurred to me, hey, nutritionist is a career. Like maybe I could do that and I could help other people learn about this. So I went back to school. I was a career changer. I went back to school for education and nutrition. And now I help other people. But over the years, with everything I've learned about how powerful this way of eating is for so many different things, I've actually come to believe that weight loss is one of the least impressive things that this can do. You can literally reverse type 2 diabetes. You can basically eliminate hypertension, gout, all of these different things. Oh, and you might also lose a few pounds or kilos along the way. And one thing that I just want to say is I've been at this long enough that when I was new, Atkins was kind of the only game in town. There was the Atkins diet, there was a book called Protein Power, and there was like one internet forum, one of those old school message boards, and that was it. And now I don't envy people that are brand new now. There's so much. When I was new, YouTube didn't even exist. Twitter, Facebook, they didn't even exist. So you just read a book, you followed the plan, and it was great. And now it's so wonderful to see how popular low carb and keto have become. But there's it's so overwhelming and there's so much confusing and conflicting information. I really, if you're out there watching or listening and you're new, I don't envy it, because I don't know how I would sort through it all to even get started right now. It was easy when I was new.
Yeah, no, this is fantastic. I'm really excited about where you're going to take us in the conversation about your current viewpoint on carbs, and to simplify it, I guess, which is going to excite everybody. But going back to the original book, I mean, I get a hold of Atkins as well, but you know, I'm living in Scotland at the time, and you know, my wife and I would get on planes and go to America and Canada. I'd be in business, but we would just take, you know, cases and fill it up with those silly Atkins bars, you know, because there was nothing else, you know, there was no recipes really, there was no understanding of it. You bought these bars, you got thin. that's kind of like, and yeah, I've always been searching my health, because I got into this not because of weight loss, but primarily because of my health. You know, I've been diagnosed with a sort of strange illness. Doctors don't understand, don't know what causes it, don't have a cure, but they would give me one anyway, which wasn't very helpful in terms of its longevity, in terms of my health. So I've always been on the lookout for something new. And when all of this low carb thing showed up, it suddenly made so much sense, and here we go. So I suppose if you went back to school, you get qualified, as it were, you start to presumably get clients. What were you kind of noticing about your clients that sustained you to believe you were on the right path?
I kind of knew I was on the right path. My history was that I went to school for nutrition after I had already been eating low carb for a few years myself.
Right.
So I didn't get trained as a dietitian or a nutritionist in the conventional thinking and then have to unlearn all that. I went into it already having lost weight and already knowing a bit about low carb.
Yeah.
So when I was learning even the fundamental biochemistry and the physiology, I would say, oh, that's why low carb does what no wonder. Oh, that's how insulin works. No wonder this works the way it does. So I didn't have that cognitive dissonance. I kind of already trusted that this would be effective and safe, for that matter.
Yeah, and so if you and yeah, you're right, you did say that. So you go in there, as it were, armed with this knowledge. Were you getting traditional kind of nutritional training? Were you kind of an outlier? Were you constantly challenging it, or did you just keep your mouth shut? How did you cope with all of that?
I was pretty fortunate in that I chose the particular school I chose because I knew that they would have a slightly unconventional view on things.
Cool.
It was in the US, at least, I think there's 5 fully accredited naturopathic medical colleges. And I didn't go to the naturopathic school, but the university I went to had an accredited naturopathic school. So just the presence of that on the campus, I knew they were a little bit open-minded to something off the beaten path. And, you know, to my professor's credit, when you learn there was no dogma in my education. It was the science. Here's the human anatomy and physiology. Here's how this pathway works. Here's how this enzyme works. There was no religion about it. There was no, it wasn't a belief system. It was these are the facts of how the human body works and how different foods are digested and what happens. And the interesting part to me, so I didn't really have to challenge most of it, but it's interesting that some of my classmates, we could learn the exact same science, but interpret it differently. Come away with thinking, okay, oh, well, no wonder low carb that's great. Someone else could say, oh, well, no wonder that's why this other way of eating is. So that was a little bit strange, but to my professor's credit, many of them, while they were not, you know, I certainly didn't learn keto. I mean, I learned keto on my own, but most of them knew and said outright that most people are eating too much carbohydrate, and, you know, saturated fat is not harmful. Yeah. So I think they were pretty forward thinking at that time.
Wow. And so when you did set up though, and you started to do your thing, what attracted you to the Alzheimer's? Because you published that book, and I've heard you speak about that before passionately, and it really inspired me. But how did that path happen?
Yeah, that's you must be familiar with Gary Taubes.
Yes, of course.
So yeah, in Gary Taubes' book, Good Calories, Bad Calories, he has a chapter where he talks about dementia, cancer, and aging. And I read that book around 2008 or 2009. And that was before I went to school for nutrition, but I was already eating low carb. But I don't have a family history of Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
So it didn't stand out that much to me, but it planted a seed like, oh, that's interesting. That was the first time I had ever heard about a potential connection between glucose, insulin, and Alzheimer's. And I kind of filed it away like, oh, maybe I'll look into that sometime in the future. And when I was in school and I had to pick a thesis topic, I said, what is something that there's enough information out there that I could write a big thesis on. I did a research review, something that would actually interest me enough to want to learn more about it, and something that hasn't already been written about over and over again. And I said, let me look at that Alzheimer's. Let me start looking into the medical research and see, is there even any data on this? And when I started looking, it was everywhere. Wow. You almost have to be purposefully ignoring it to miss it. And it's not brand new. Some of the research actually goes back a few decades at this point. They regularly refer to Alzheimer's disease as type 3 diabetes or diabetes of the brain. Now, there's a lot of different kinds of dementia that have other causes, but this big one, it was amazing to me. It's more and more mainstream publications are talking about it now, but at the time, we're talking about 2012, which is already 8 years ago. Yeah. There was nothing about this. And after having written and so if anyone's wondering why would a ketogenic nutritionist care about Alzheimer's, it's this type 3 diabetes angle. And after graduating, I said, why? And my thesis covered the potential therapeutic use of a ketogenic diet to possibly help the brain. I thought, I truly think this could be life-changing, life-saving information. Nobody's going to know about it. It's sitting in a file on my professor's computer. No one's ever going to see this. So I made a little PDF ebook that I self-published, and then I was fortunate that a sort of quote unquote real publisher found it and wanted to put it into the world. So it's been nice to see that it's gaining more traction, but I think it's still known very, very little.
No, I think you're right. It's well, I scan the newspapers here for information, and I don't think anything's showing up yet. They've pretty occasionally. I mean, Gary Taubes' book's been reviewed in The Guardian, which is fantastic. I've reached out to Gary too, and I see I've got an email back from his secretary, so maybe he's up next. So, because the two books of the season, of course, are your and Eric's book and his book, so It couldn't be any better for the world. I don't think these two books are appearing right now. Obviously,
and to think, I have to say, like I said, I was a career changer. I read Gary Taubes' book, and almost 10 years ago, or no, over 10 years ago. To think that I now, speak at some of the same conferences, it's mind-blowing to me that, and even Dr. Westam, that I co-wrote a book with him. I have this man on a pedestal where I have Stephen Finney and Jeff Volek, and to think that I even talk to these people I can't believe the cool kids are letting me sit at their lunch table,
Well, I'm glad they are, because this is so let's get into the book, because it obviously, I think, what is it they say, when you're ready to learn, the teacher comes along, or something like that. And I think the world, I mean, we with the COVID thing, and if you have I was listening to the Low Carb MD podcast, the most recent one, just the one that's out today here, and I was listening to it, and one of the guys, the doctors there, was saying that once you go into the space of the low carb keto thing, and you see all the sort of vested interests and the kind of, a phrase we use a lot here, dodgy kind of science, flawed science, then it's quite easy for someone who's been down that route finding results with keto and low carb to then think, well, what if the COVID thing's kind of similar? What if, there's science that might not be that helpful? And what if there's vested interests and closed minds? So you never know. So we're not, just so you know, the people who follow me here and people who watch this, we're not interested in the conspiracy. We just, we're not going there. But what we are interested in is, to use a phrase, begging to differ, wanting to open their minds to the alternative or the wider spectrum. Yeah, what's going on. So don't worry about any views we may have about, but it'd be interesting. I think your books, as I said already, it's arrived at exactly the right time for the world, I think. And it's a privilege to help people maybe understand it. So do you want to tell us a wee bit about the book, how it came about, your particular role in it, what your passions for it are?
Yeah. Like I said, it's when I was new, it was easy to start a low carb or ketogenic diet because there was less information, but there was less misinformation and there was less overwhelm. And our book title says it all: End Your Carb Confusion. And we wrote the book I would want to have if I was new. Yeah. If I wanted a simple, clear, easy to understand message. The book is very, very scientifically sound, but there's no medical jargon. There's no big, complicated science gobbledygook in it. It's plain English. Yeah. And we also kind of, we explain, not everybody needs a very low carb diet. Some people do well eating whatever or eating higher carbs, but many, many millions of us really do best keeping our carbs low. And our book talks about why do some people really benefit from keeping carbs very low? And we even have a checklist that you fill out that, based on your answers, it points you toward a carbohydrate intake to start with. And obviously, the sicker you are, the more extra weight you're carrying, the stricter, the lower carb you need to be to start. And over time, you may be able to increase a little bit, but we explain all the metabolic syndrome type stuff, the type 2 diabetes, the PCOS. But one thing that's really personal to me, well, I'm getting a little bit far afield, but one thing that I, insisted we have in the book is that it's not all about weight. We live in such a size-centric world, and there's millions of people that are at I hate this phrase, but a quote unquote normal weight, who have raging type 2 diabetes, raging cardiovascular disease, hypertension, migraines, joint pain. So even if somebody's not, we tend to think of a low carb diet for weight loss, but it does all these other things, even if you're not carrying extra weight. And Dr. Westam and I teamed up because he and I both have a perspective where this way of eating is actually really, really simple. People have made it complicated. What makes it work, the number one most important thing that makes it work, is keeping your carbohydrate intake very low. People are concerned about protein. They're concerned about the seed oils. They're concerned about this and that and fasting. Start with the one thing that actually has all the power, which is limiting the carbs. And you can do it on any budget. If you can afford the organic pasture-raised meats, great. If you can't, I don't know what you have available where you live, but we have discount stores that are very inexpensive, and that works too. You can go to a fast food restaurant and get the burger patty without the bun. And there's just, so many people, and I'm sure you see this all the time, so many people in our community they're raising the bar. They're making it harder for people to come in and do this. They're making it sound more elitist, more expensive, more complicated. We wanted to make this as accessible and doable to as many people as possible, because I think a lot of people probably don't even try to start a low carb or keto diet because it's so like, oh, I can't even figure it out. They don't even try. And we want to say, no, it's really easy. Just keep your carbs low.
No, it's fantastic. I mean, I think again, the book's of its time. It's required. It's needed. Because you're right. I mean, the more I've listened to, literally, I think about 4,000 podcasts over the course of the four or 5 years I've been doing this, and it gets more and more complicated. You're right. You can dive into real gobbledygook science and go, oh my God, what are they talking about? And I suspect sometimes I'm enthusing about it, and someone goes to a resource and it's one of those heavy scientific ones, and it just turns them off. Whereas I think what you're suggesting is really, really important. So what do you think the person who's kind of hearing about it, and how does the book suck them in to feel safe in the book? Do you know what I mean? How did you go about that? Because sometimes that in itself, for people who really need to do this, maybe they don't read books. You know what I mean? How did you get them sucked in?
Well, it's the reader is going to have to judge whether or not we were successful. But what we try to do is write it in a very inviting style. It's written in Dr. Westam's voice when he's saying, I see this in my patients, but we tried to make it sound like we're all in this together, because I'm a low carb success story myself. I was heavier. I've had benefits from it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like we understand the struggle. We understand trying to do all the right things, or how I'm scared, or not me, but like the reader could be thinking, I'm scared. You're telling me it's okay to eat butter. It's okay to eat the red meat that I've heard all my life is bad for me. And we even have sections in there. And this is something that's really missing from our community, I think, is talking about, sugar addiction, food addiction, and then how to navigate this with a family. I'm the only one in my household who eats this way. What do I do? What do I do? Somebody's trying to sabotage me, or somebody doesn't support me. We try to write it in a style that just makes it sound like this is not that complicated, because it's not. No. Like you were saying, with all these fancy books, I'm fascinated by that stuff. Maybe we like to read the scientific papers that have all the diagrams, but there's a lot of people that don't want that. And you don't have to understand any of it. I don't have to understand the physics and the science of electricity to know that when I flip the switch, the light comes on. So we try to write the carb education book that's like, here's the basic minimum stuff to know. And I think we try to explain, like, this is safe and here's why, and it's effective and here's why. You don't have to don't take our word. We're not promising, we're not like telling you, here, maybe this will work. Try. It works. It will work, and we believe it, and you just have to do it. I don't know if that answers your question, but
no, it does. And I mean, I love the fact that you're focusing on what you say is like the kernel of it, which is just get rid of the carbs, or massively reduce your carbs. And presumably you're getting people away from processed carbs. So in the beginning, what's the range? Do you get people to measure anything, or are you just saying have common sense about it, or are you saying 20?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's both. Yeah. If we have a food list and there's some guidelines with, have this much of this and this much of this, but those guidelines it's intended to eliminate the need for weighing and measuring and tracking all your food, because I love food. I tell people I'm never going to sit down with a spreadsheet at the dinner table. I don't want to do it. I don't want to track. That has a place. I'm not opposed to doing that. It can be helpful, but I don't want to turn my meals into a math homework assignment. So the way that we show you how to do it, if you follow those instructions, you don't need to weigh and measure and track. You can if you want to, but you don't need to. And it's the sicker, the more severe your health problems, or the more weight you're looking to lose, the stricter you need to be. And when I say stricter, there's only one thing you need to worry about at first, and that's just the total amount of carbohydrate you're eating. And then as you get better, as your health improves, you start experimenting with reintroducing small amounts of higher carbs. But the other thing with regard to measuring is people, your audience may be familiar that you can actually measure your ketone level.
Yes.
With blood, breath, or urine. That's not required. Again, you can if you want to, but you don't need to. The way we instruct, you will be in ketosis. If you follow our guidelines, you will be in a ketogenic state, so you won't have to measure. You can, but you won't have to.
I think that's fantastic because, I'm 5 years in, or just getting into my 5th year, and I've never measured anything. I mean, no blood, haven't measured a thing because I thought, well, I know the difference, clarity of mind, difference in health, I'm weighing what I weighed when I was 20, sort of thing. Why, I just know it's working. So that's really encouraging, especially if two doctors are saying that in a sense, you don't need to measure. So what would you recommending people do if they're coming at it fresh? They're used to eating the sort of standard American diet or the British version, or they're just eating what they want, which is a lot of carbs, and they come to this. And what are you typically asking them to do?
There's two different ways. The way that we think is best is that ripping the Band-Aid off all at once, just change your food immediately, just clear out the pantry, clear out your fridge. I mean, if you live with other people, you just have to do the best you can. But we just recommend get familiar with the food list, go shopping, get what you need, and just do it. Now, if somebody's not prepared for that, it's okay to ease in gradually. But I think if you want to feel that sort of keto magic, not to sound like a snake oil salesperson, but if you really want to feel that dramatic difference, you can feel it within days if you're strict. If you kind of ease into it gradually, cutting back little by little, you'll still eventually get there, but it's going to take a lot longer. Yeah. And I think the more quickly you start to feel better, the more motivated you'll be to stay on the plan. Yeah. And so I think that's why we recommend doing it just all at once, just dive in, because when the brain fog goes away within a couple of days and the acid reflux disappears, why wouldn't you keep eating this way?
Exactly. So presumably in your own practice, and obviously in Dr. Eric's practice, you do get people to go in and start the way, clean out the pantry, as you said, clean out the fridge and get started. So what typically are you recommending people have for example? Do they have breakfast? Do they not bother? What are you suggesting happens with that first few days? Because that's really where people won't ever go, especially this time of year. They might think, well, that's it, I'm going to do it. How do you get some early win-wins? How does it happen?
So it's entirely customizable. I think some people, intermittent fasting is all the rage right now, but you don't have to fast. If you want to eat 3 meals a day and even have snacks, that's okay, as long as you're eating the right things. And so when we use the phrase breakfast, you can eat first thing in the morning if you want, but if you're not hungry, wait a few hours until you are hungry. Yeah. But most of the people who come to me for help have already been doing a low carb or ketogenic diet, and they're not getting the results they want, so we just have to troubleshoot. But if somebody's brand new to this, I recommend follow the food list, eat as much as you want, as often as you want. I don't want you to worry about calories. I don't want you to worry about your portions. Eat as much as you want, as long as you're eating foods on the list, because we just want you to get over the hump of that sort of sugar withdrawal. We call it the keto flu or the low carb flu, where you might feel worse for a day or two before you start to feel better. And so during that period, I don't want people to worry about anything except just getting the carbs out of their diet. And so, I mean, I think you were asking maybe like for an example or something. The traditional breakfast everyone thinks of is bacon and eggs, which is fine, but something I have to retrain people to think about is that a meal is just food. There's really no such thing as breakfast food or dinner food. You can have leftover chicken and broccoli for breakfast if you want.
Yeah.
You can have it like how many of us have omelets or eggs for dinner?
Yeah.
So just because it's breakfast, it doesn't have to be sausage or bangers or whatever they call it where you live. It doesn't have to be that kind of thing. It could be leftover meatloaf. It could be canned salmon.
Yeah.
It just has to be food that's low in carbohydrate.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I found that you mentioned coffee and cream early on. I used to encourage people not to drink coffee because of the high effect on the brain of brain frequencies, but it doesn't matter. And then suddenly they see me drinking coffee. It's like, oh wow, Jack's drinking coffee, and I had to get used to drinking coffee because I hadn't never had it really before. And so I found that having a coffee with cream, somehow or other, I wasn't hungry after that. So I didn't expect that, but I just didn't feel hungry. So I didn't need a breakfast. I got to lunchtime and then I started to eat whatever. But
yeah.
But tell me this. I mean, do you cover the whole thing about, because I know lots of us have had to confront this in my life for 50 years at least, I was told that fat's going to give you a heart attack. It's going to line your arteries, you're going to get a stroke. And in my family, heart disease and strokes, well, that's how we all go. So on both sides, going back to my mum's side, my dad's side, that's how it all goes. And here you are being told to have cream and have butter and and keep the fat on your steak, and eat it and have bacon and don't take the rind away. And suddenly you've got this, can I trust this? Do you deal with that? How do you help people with that? Because that's a big one, isn't it?
Well, in my practice, like I said, most people are already eating this way, so I don't have to convince them. They kind of already know. But in the book, we didn't actually talk, in my Alzheimer's book. I have a whole chapter on, or 2 chapters. It's okay to eat red meat. It's okay to eat fat, especially saturated animal fat, because if I'm going to tell elderly or older people with the medical condition to eat certain things, I have to explain it actually is safe, and here's the science, and here's why. So in my book with Dr. Westam, we talk actually very little about it, except to say it's simply not true that saturated fat causes heart disease. It was old, outdated science. It was very poorly done science and poorly interpreted science that over the last 50 to 60 years, it's been completely overturned, even if governmental nutritional guidelines haven't caught up with the new data. There's just reams and reams of scientific evidence at this point that this is not harmful. We're just not concerned about it. And we do recommend Nina Teicholz's book, The Big Fat Surprise, which I think probably does the best job of anything in completely debunking that saturated fat thing. But that is an issue. But we just reassure people it's simply untrue that that's harmful. And and if somebody happens to be concerned about that, despite what you see on social media about keto, you don't have to eat butter and bacon and red meat. You can. What defines a low carb or ketogenic diet is just that, the low carbohydrate intake. So if you'd prefer to get more of your fat from seafood and poultry and avocado and olive oil, that's fine. You don't have to eat all of this red meat and saturated. You can, because it's delicious, and why wouldn't you want to? But if for whatever reason you feel more comfortable doing it another way, what makes this way of eating effective for the weight loss and all those other health issues is the lower blood sugar and the lower insulin, and that comes because of the lower carbs.
Yeah, I mean, I think what's exciting for people is that both you and Dr. Eric Westam are 20 years each in the space. It's not as if you just came to this 18 months ago and suddenly, there's a market for a book here. You guys have been doing this separately for 20 years. And neither of you have keeled over yet, so there must be.
That's what I think. And you know what? This is a little controversial. I don't know what's available in other countries, but I use artificial sweeteners, and I'm still here.
Yeah.
You know, if people would rather avoid those, that's fine. But especially, you know, if you are living with morbid obesity or type 2 diabetes or PCOS or something, in an ideal world, you would give up soda or pop altogether and just drink water. But if you can't do that, please drink diet soda. Please have the transition step, have something better, because at least that I'm not personally concerned about the safety issues with the sweeteners, but if somebody is, what is your concern? The fact that you are 200 pounds or 100 kilos overweight and you have all these medical problems right now that are really impairing your quality of life, or are you worried about some iffy science about the sweeteners? So that's something we talk about in the book, is we really do not fearmonger about any of these issues. And Dr. Westam, with 20 years of treating patients, not theoretical, not mouse models, treating human beings, he sees it every day in his clinic that yes, you can drink diet soda, you can use sucralose or saccharin in your coffee, you can eat regular store-bought meat that may be grain-fed or in a feedlot, and you can still lose the weight and reverse the diabetes and get off the blood pressure medication and all this. So, if somebody has the budget and has the access to a certain quality of food, great. But if you don't, it's not at all an obstacle to doing this and being successful.
Yeah. So I'm glad you said that again. There may be something just to reinforce for a moment is when I started 4 years ago or so, what happened was I very quickly was being recommended to take all sorts of supplements along with it. And my intuition was, oh no, I really don't want to do that. Take all the supplements. I just wanted to eat food. I'm very fortunate. I've always cooked real food. I've always bought the food. I've always cooked the food since for 50 years. I've been doing cooking. So it's not an issue. But I just didn't feel right about the taking supplements. Now with COVID, I am looking at vitamin D, but and C and zinc and stuff like that. But what are you? Do you mention the thing about supplementation, or is it not important?
It's interesting, to be honest. Dr. Westam and I differ a little bit here. Yep. He's not really big on supplements. We mentioned that you should be able to get everything from the food you're eating.
Yeah.
Now, people think, at least we have those 3 different phases of our program of different level of carbohydrate intake. When you're at the first phase, which is very, very low in carbs, your carbohydrate intake, even from things like spinach or broccoli, is limited because it's still carbohydrate. And so a lot of people wonder, where will I get my X nutrient or this mineral? Because we tend to think that it's all vegetables and fruit, right? All those rainbow colored foods. But the truth is, the animal foods are loaded with vitamins and minerals: beef, pork, seafood, off the charts. So for the most part, you can get what you need, but there is a real thing of biological individuality among us. And especially when your carbohydrate intake is really, really low. Some people do need extra magnesium, extra potassium, and sodium, which I don't know if we would consider that a supplement, but you really need to be very generous with salt, because when your carb intake is really, really low, your body flushes a lot of these minerals out and you need to have more than usual. And then, like you said, with COVID, there may, or with any other health issue, there may be certain supplements that can help, either for a limited period of time or maybe a low dose for a long period of time. Something like, if somebody has osteoporosis, for example, I wouldn't necessarily recommend a calcium supplement, but there are other minerals that might be able to help with bone strength. It's really individualized, but for the most part, you can get what you get from food. Although Dr. Westam says, if you want to, just as a little insurance policy, just take a multivitamin.
Yeah, well, that makes sense, doesn't it, for people who might have any. So inevitably, I started this Wednesday night thing. I thought I'd do 1 or 2 and then it'd go away, but 46 on, still doing it. And inevitably, I trust my intuition. I follow intuition and coincidence, see where it takes us, and we end up with Amy Berger on I never have thought this would have happened, but here we are. So inevitably, I'd like to ask you about COVID, not the politics of it, but presumably, I mean, you're on all these, you're on endless podcasts. You're on the circuit. You were traveling the world anyway. Now not so much, I guess, but you're still speaking at the conferences. You must have amazing networks of people. What are you thinking about COVID, and what can you advise us with? It's inevitable I'm going to ask you.
Yeah. So with the caveat that I'm not a physician, I'm a nutritionist. It is my understanding that having anything really related to metabolic syndrome, which is just a fancy way to say that you have chronically high insulin, that's what drives metabolic syndrome. If you have problems with chronically high insulin or blood sugar, like type 2 diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, gout, PCOS, some people have skin tags, all of these different things, that underlying metabolic disturbance makes you more susceptible to getting COVID. And if you do get it, you may have a worse prognosis, meaning it's going to be harder for your body to fight it off and for you to recover. Yeah. Now, that does not mean by any stretch of the imagination that being on a low carb or ketogenic diet makes you immune. I do think being healthier is being healthier. If you are healthier overall, your immune system theoretically should be more robust. So I don't think there's any denying that. I mean, the data seem to be showing that people with these underlying problems are more at risk. Yeah. So anything we can do to correct some of that might be beneficial. I don't know that I can say anything more than that. Supplemental vitamin D, supplemental vitamin C, maybe these things can help bolster the immune system, but I think the critical thing is to just be in as good a state of health as you can to begin with.
Yeah. I mean, we started hearing about it in February here, and since then, I've still listened to hundreds of podcasts with all the big names and people like yourself. I've never heard any of them who have been pro low carb suddenly saying because of COVID they're going to cancel low carb. It's like no one's saying all that. So we do keep consistently hearing people I've interviewed on here. We keep hearing this thing about being metabolically robust. Many of us have experimented with glucose monitors, see what happened. Even those of us who don't think we've got any trace of type 2 diabetes, but it was alarming how certain foodstuffs, even small amounts, would take you way out over the safety zone. So I take it you would still recommend keto and low carb to people who are interested in getting healthy in light of what's going on with COVID.
Oh, of course. I don't think I haven't seen any evidence that there's any harm in doing low carb in terms of like making you more susceptible. If anything, it might be the opposite. Like I said, not that low carb or keto makes you immune, but that having conditions related to chronically high blood sugar and insulin make you more susceptible and give you a worse outcome. But I don't want to get into the politics, but I am a lot disturbed by some of the rhetoric that I hear coming from people in the low carb camp. And I partially can't blame them, because when you spend, especially the doctors, when you spent hundreds of thousands of dollars on a medical education and you've been taught one way, and then you learn, oh my gosh, so much of what I learned was wrong or incomplete. And even as a nutritionist, like, okay, the authorities and the quote unquote experts have been so wrong about food for so long. What else are they wrong about? Yeah. Why should they were wrong about saturated fat. They're wrong about red meat. They're wrong about XYZ cholesterol. Mm-hmm. Why should I trust them about anything else? So I understand that point, that contrarian sort of wanting to ask those questions. But I also think just because they were wrong about certain things doesn't mean they're wrong about everything else.
Exactly. Yeah. So caution. So the point, of course, is so you're not doing anything particular to maintain a robust immune system, or you just being yourself and eating the way you always did over the last 20 years or so? There's nothing different you're doing. Are you supplementing to protect yourself?
I'm not doing anything differently, but I feel like I already had a pretty healthy life, but it's easy for me. I'm not married. I don't have kids.
Right.
So my schedule allows me to exercise regularly, to cook a lot of my own food. Even now in the winter time, I still go outside for walks as much as I can. I'll bundle up and layer, so I'm not really exposed to, I'm all covered up. I don't get the sunlight, but I was supplementing with vitamin D anyway.
Okay.
And so I didn't feel like there was a whole lot that I could be doing differently.
Good.
If that wasn't the case, I maybe would have tried to start exercising more, definitely get more sunlight or supplement with vitamin D. But and that's not to like talk myself like, oh, I was already living perfect. No, I don't know what else I would do. I think there's some wishful thinking out there that, oh, this is good for the immune system, or that, where's the science behind some of that?
Yeah, no, we need the science, absolutely. We can't argue about science being dodgy and then suddenly not look for the science when we're thinking of taking vitamin D, for example. You're right.
Mm-hmm.
So thank God there is science. But so going back to Alzheimer's for a moment, one of the things I'm also interested in is the notion of healthy lifespan. And again, you move in circles. You're part of the community, leading role. But what's your thoughts on maintaining healthy lifespan? Quite a lot of people who are following me will be, I'm 65. People who follow me might be getting close to that, one or two over that. Interested in longevity. What's your thoughts with that?
I think there's a couple of different ways to look at it. There's a lifespan, and then there's what they're now calling health span.
Yep.
So you could live until you're 105, but do you want to spend those last 2 decades in a wheelchair, incontinent, catatonic, staring at the wall? Or do you maybe want to make it to 85, but be walking around and doing your own yard work? So now maybe those two are not mutually exclusive. Maybe you can live until 110 and be very active and all with it, cognitively speaking. I think the longevity, there's a lot of fear in the longevity circles, because I don't know how deep in the weeds we want to get,
no.
But there's evidence from very low order animals that protein restriction can extend lifespan, or caloric restriction, and most of that has not panned out in humans. And part of that is we don't have the human data. You can't, it's unethical to run that kind of experiment, right? To restrict somebody's calories or protein from the minute they're born and see how they do 100 years later. We can't do that experiment. No. I think, in my opinion, some of the most important things you can do to potentially help with healthy aging and keeping your cognitive faculties intact, and I say potentially because we don't know any of this for sure, is to maintain healthy blood sugar levels, healthy insulin levels, muscle mass, which means I don't like for people to restrict protein in older age. The more muscle mass you have, the higher your chance of living independently, of being able to get up out of a chair under your own power, to be able to carry your own packages out of the car. And I don't think there's any denying that people with type 2 diabetes is just the most extreme example, but people with chronically high blood sugar age more quickly.
Yeah.
I mean, type 2 diabetes, if you read the work of Dr. Joseph Kraft, it's a vascular disease. It's a blood vessel disease. It ages all the blood vessels. It ages all the tissues. I think one of the most important things that we can do to protect our bodies as we age is keep that blood sugar in a healthy range. But the amount of, now I didn't say do a ketogenic diet. I said keep blood sugar in a healthy range. Yeah. The amount of carbohydrate that any one person can consume and still accomplish that is going to be different. Some of us will need keto. Some of us can be a little more liberal with carbs. I mean, that's something that we talk about in the new book. But because I get that question a lot with the Alzheimer's. Oh, I'm 65, I'm 70. Is it too late? Like, is it, I've been eating a regular sort of standard diet my whole life. Is it too late? I don't think it's ever too late. I
No.
don't think it's ever too late. You may not be able to go and undo all the quote unquote damage that may have been done, but you can maybe stop it from getting worse.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's.
Well, I would say I was reasonably healthy. I did have a chest situation, which is what's been bothering me for 30 years, which I've been dealing with always on my own because doctors can't help. But the interesting thing is that when I had a go at keto and got myself, like you said, just throw everything out, start from scratch, just full dive in. I dived in. 2 or 3 days later, I've suddenly got a clarity of thought I hadn't had for 30 years, and I thought I was cool. But suddenly I've got this, my God, where has that been? And it's still here. So I suspect, that in terms of keeping back mental challenges or mind challenges or brain challenges, it currently just makes sense to me. I'm feeling better and all the rest of it. Why would I go back to eating all that food that must have been creating that brain fog? I'm not going to do it. No, so that's fantastic. And last week we had on Alvin Dannenberg. I don't know if you've ever come across Alvin.
Mm-hmm.
He, as you know, he backed himself out of a hospice, by going keto, which is fantastic. And he's been we've had him on 4 times. Everybody loves him, so we keep getting him back. But he was talking about last week about he's been recycling a little bit out of 1 day a week. He comes out of the sort of lower carb thing, the sort of 20, but he comes out and he maybe does. He suggested he might do about 100 or whatever, and then he goes back in again for the rest of the week. Do you do a bit of that type of thing, or are you kind of strict?
I do it, but I don't do any. I don't follow any particular protocol. So I think I said earlier, my own diet is not always strictly ketogenic. I'm always low carb.
Yeah.
So I never wake up and have a glass of orange juice and a big stack of pancakes and a muffin, but I'm not always 20 grams of carbs or fewer. I'm in ketosis a lot of the time just because of what I normally eat, but I don't aim to be there all the time. So for example, if I'm at a party and somebody has hummus, I might have some of the hummus. If I'm at a restaurant and they bring fresh bread, I might have a piece once in a while, not all the time. Yeah. So there's a lot of debate about whether or not that's not just not harmful, but actually beneficial to have those carb ups every now and then. I think they can be. I do see, especially in younger women, people that are doing very, very strict ketogenic diets who don't need to. Not that it's not harmful, but whether it's because they're very athletic or there's some other situation, they might feel better with 50 or 80 grams of carbs, not 200 or 300 grams of carbs, but a little bit more. And I think we've gone a little too far in the keto world of demonizing all carbohydrate. It's a problem when somebody comes to me and they're literally terrified to eat a little bit of shredded carrot on a salad. Like we've gone a little too far. So the way I explain it to people too, and we talk about it in the book, is it's not let's say once a month you go to your favorite Mexican restaurant and you really want the rice and beans or the tortillas because it's so good, and you're having that kind of stuff every now and then is not the reason that so many of us became overweight or obese or diabetic. It's because we were eating like it's Thanksgiving or Christmas every single day of the year. We were feasting, we were gorging all day, every day. When you have a little bit more carbohydrate once in a while, it's really not that big a problem. Now, if you're new to this and you are in a very severe health situation, I do recommend being strict for a while. Get yourself out of that situation, get used to eating this way as your baseline. And then when you have the occasional day off or meal off, it's second nature. You get right back on. I think if you do that too early, before your body's really fully accustomed, and this is just your new way of doing things, it's too easy to fall back into those old habits.
Yeah.
So, right now, I think a lot of us get to a point where we can have a meal that's off plan, and then you're right back on. It's not like, well, it's ruined, I guess I'll start again next week or next month.
Yeah.
It's not a big deal once in a while. Now, again, the more severe your situation, or if you're somebody that has epilepsy or bipolar or some condition where you use a strict ketogenic diet as a medical therapy, that's different. You can't,
No, I know.
you can't, getting out of ketosis for you could trigger a seizure or could trigger some kind of severe thing. If you're in it mostly for the weight loss or just overall health, every now and then having those carbs is not really a problem.
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, at least that's what I seem to experience. I'm quite excited again. I've said that you're not encouraging people to completely get lots of supplements, and you're not suggesting they test all the time to find out, am I in ketosis, which is great. A lot of us who would follow here are interested in intuition. And we have various tools for accessing intuition as part of what I've been teaching for 30 years. And so I find that if I do have, like what you say, I'm out, or I just, for whatever reason, decide to have a piece of Indian bread with a curry, I can go straight back in. I'm not going to suddenly be eating bread all week. It's one meal and off you go again. Right. If I do that, not often, but if I do that, I'm always interested, how does my body respond, like over the next 24 hours or day and a half? And I always feel there's a difference. It's just my body kind of reports back, well, look what's happening. Maybe I lose a stool, or maybe I didn't sleep so well. Maybe I feel something like what might be slightly gouty thing going on in my finger or my toe. And I go, oh, that's interesting. And then it goes away again. So do you encourage that, or do you yourself listen to your body and so on?
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to think if we mentioned that in the book, that kind of really tuning into your own body. It's more the higher level, giving you a strategy. Yeah. That it's really an individual thing. How much wiggle room do you have for that stuff? And when we have the 3 phases, and we give some instructions about how to progress from one phase to the next. If you want to, some people are perfectly content staying really, really low carb all the time. Yeah. But if you get to a point where you want to increase, you increase very gradually, so that you can identify the point at which, okay, I can have this much carbohydrate on a regular basis without triggering those things that I got rid of, without bringing back the reflux or the headaches or the acne or whatever thing was, a problem with the previous diet. So you can identify where that happens. Yeah. To be honest, we don't talk a whole lot about, hey, if you go off plan, the next day you're going to feel XYZ. We do caution that if you do eat a higher carb meal, do not get on the scale the next day. No. Because people don't understand how this works. Your carbohydrate is like a sponge in your body. So if you've been really low carb and then you have a big carb day or a big carb meal, your body is going to hold on to all this extra water until that's gone within another day or two of being back on plan. Yeah. People will see that they've gained 2 or 3 pounds, and they're scared, they're terrified. It's not body fat, it's just the water retention. Yeah. So that's mostly what we talk about. But I think feeling well, like you were saying, the mental sharpness and all the other things that happen, that's the biggest incentive to keep eating in a way that works for you. I mean, why would you go back to something that starts to make you feel bad? And I just lost my whole train of thought.
Do you think we become more sensitive the more that we become low carb? Do you think we are more sensitive to subtlety? I mean, I do find if I do, have a little more carb, I can almost, maybe I'm expecting it, but by the next day, there's always a little thing, oh, there you go, there it is. It's almost like I'm so sensitive to the nuance of it.
Yeah.
Do you think that's true, or do you think that's just me?
I think some people probably do. I can't say for everybody, but I think some people are really, it does help you tune in, especially if you get some people will have immediate feedback. They'll get heartburn right away, or joint pain, or like you said, a gout flare or something.
Yeah.
If that happens that evening or the next day or a couple of hours later, that's good information. Like you were saying, do we don't require people to measure ketones and do all this testing, because your body will tell you how you're doing.
Yeah.
Your body will tell, do you feel more energy? Do your joints still hurt? Is your skin? Some of these things might not happen right away. They might take a few weeks, or in some cases a few months, but you'll know. And we only recommend ketone testing with urine strips if somebody wants to, not for the purpose of because higher ketones don't cause the diet to work better.
Yes.
But seeing the color change is a morale boost. It's like, it can keep you motivated. It's positive reinforcement.
Yeah.
And that's the main reason I would encourage someone to test, is that it might help you keep going. And it's great for troubleshooting, because if you think you're doing the right things and you're not getting the results you want, that's the first place to check. Are you actually in ketosis or not?
Yeah.
So there are reasons to test like that, but it's not so much to micromanage the details.
Yeah. I mean, my own journey, I've always been interested in getting the maximum health, primarily because I was standing on stages, sometimes in America, 10,000 people, and I'm doing my thing, or 100 or 200 or 1,000, whatever it would be, anywhere, and people expected me to look really good, as well as be this guy who was a great speaker. And so I was constantly having to look after myself, because I, like you, I was eating all the healthy food, but I kept putting weight on. Where's this weight coming from? And what I realized, actually, and I was 12 years vegetarian and occasionally vegan. And I do think that on that journey of that phase, that's where I became unwell, because I use this word called, I wasn't a vegetarian or a vegan. I was actually a grainarian. It's a word I created. Because what I was doing, I was a grainarian. Scott, I was eating grains with vegetables. It wasn't I was a vegetarian who occasionally had grains. It was the other way around. And of course, those grains were cooked in seed oils. They just were. And I reckon that's what made me ill, So when it came to becoming, looking at low carb, I don't know if you think this is helpful, but what I did was, like a lot of people who cook food regularly or all the time, you've got standard meals that you tend to have every other week. You have, my generation, a spaghetti bolognese, or you're going to have a chili or something, or a curry. Well, I decided I wasn't going to take them out. I was just going to adjust them. And instead of having rice, or instead of having pasta, I had cauliflower rice. And I had that instead of pasta. And I'm still getting all the flavor and all the taste and all the texture, but I was no longer eating those grains. Do you recommend that type of thing for people coming in?
Oh, absolutely. This diet is entirely customizable to what you like, as long as the carbs are low. Yeah. And we're actually really fortunate. Like we were saying earlier, when I was new, I never would I have imagined that this way of eating would have become so popular that you can go to the grocery store now and buy pre-made riced cauliflower and zucchini spiral noodles. You used to have to make this at home if you even knew that it was an option. And now they make even pre-made, like mashed cauliflower, like as a potato substitute. So yeah, that's a perfect. So whatever, if you have a certain ethnicity, like use the Indian cuisine, the curry, Asian food, the rice, there's substitutes for all of this. The texture might be a little different, but the flavor is there, all the herbs and spices. It's one of the nice things about low carb or keto. you can have anything as long as it's low in carb. And that for me, that's it is the hard part, because you can recreate the flavor of anything. If you use the right herbs and spices and sauces, the texture sometimes isn't quite right, but you can, we talk in the book, you can do this if you keep kosher, if you are halal, whatever religious restrictions you have. You can even do vegetarian keto. We don't recommend it. It may be not the most nutritionally sound way to go, but if that's what you want to do, you can do it.
Yeah, you can, even as a vegan, you can do it. Or apparently, I don't know personally. Time's flying by, and I want to just quickly, what about your middle book? What was that all about?
Oh, thanks. It's called The Stall Slayer. People can get it at stallslayer.com, or it's also on Amazon. It's specifically about breaking fat loss stalls on keto or low carb diets, which is the most common reason people come to me for help. And it's usually some very simple troubleshooting and it's part of one of the things that's happened in the last few years with keto is, see, I don't even love the phrase keto or ketogenic, because it puts the emphasis on being in ketosis or eating lots of fat when where you need to be is very low in carbs. So I've always preferred the phrase low carb. And so one of the biggest, or one of the most common reasons I see for people stalling is a little too much fat. There's too much emphasis on, all the MCT oil, the butter, the coconut oil, and it's just because you're in a low carb state doesn't mean the fat is unlimited. And we definitely enjoy fat. Like you were saying earlier, we don't have to cut the rind off the bacon. We can eat the fat on the steak, but it's not unlimited if you are already struggling to lose body fat.
Okay.
But there's other issues that I discuss in the book, but that's just one of the more common ones.
So before I ask you, how do people keep in touch with you? Is there anything else you would like to, you've got an opportunity here that people really, really going to enjoy every minute of this. Is there anything you would like else to say to them that maybe I've missed in my question?
So much. I wouldn't even know where to start. I guess it really is a lot simpler and more straightforward than you might think it is, based on there's so many books, there's so many podcasts, there's so many forums and resources, and it's all great. It's all information. But what makes this way of eating effective is cutting your carb intake. And the other stuff is not meaningless. It's not, there's a role for fasting, there's a role for eating certain types of fats and avoiding certain oils. But when you're starting out, don't worry about any of that. And you have to, especially if you're new to this and you're kind of just learning, it's going to take a mindset shift, because it is okay to eat red meat and it is okay to eat saturated fat. And for women especially, I just did a video about this for my own YouTube channel. Women have been culturally conditioned not only to not eat red meat, like it's unfeminine, it's unladylike, but to just eat this delicate little portion of protein. We've been told about 3 ounces. It's about 100 grams or so, I think, in the European units. But it's about the size of a deck of cards or the palm of your hand.
Yes.
That is nonsense. So many women are not eating anywhere near enough protein. There's just a lot of myths to wrap your mind around. And I guess it all goes hand in hand, because if you can entertain the notion that maybe all of those healthy whole grains and all that bread is not actually so good for you, what else are they wrong about? Or what other nutrition, information is actually mythical and should not be believed?
Yeah, exactly. So you've mentioned your YouTube channel. That's exciting. Can you tell us a wee bit about how people get to keep in touch with you?
Yeah, thanks. My YouTube channel is Tuit Nutrition, TUIT Nutrition, and that's my website, tuitnutrition.com. Although there's been a weird snag. You actually have to put www.tuitnutrition.com. If you just put tuitnutrition.com, you're going to get an error. That's my handle on, Twitter is really my main social media. So my handle is Tuit Nutrition. And I'm not working.
What does it mean? Chew it.
Oh, well, so a lot of people assume it's the intuition, the intuitive eating. I wish that was the explanation because that makes sense. But when it's on my website, there's a tab that says why to it. I don't know if this existed where you were, but when I was a kid, my mother had a little wooden coin that said TUIT on one side. It was around to it.
Yeah, right.
And the other side said, you're always saying, oh, I'll do this when I get around to it. All these, I'll do it when I get around to it. Well, here's your round to it.
Right.
And when I was trying to get an initial domain for my website, I tried so many combinations of different nutrition kind of things. Everything was already taken. And I said, you know, when are you going to get serious about your diet? I'll get to it. When are you going to get real about your health? Oh, someday I'll get to it. To it nutrition. Now you have to it. What are you waiting for?
Fantastic. That's wonderful. Okay, so any final remarks, Amy, before I let you go?
No, that's it. The new book is End Your Carb Confusion. The Alzheimer's book is called The Alzheimer's Antidote. Everything's on Amazon. And I just feel humbled and privileged to be in a forum where you talk to people like Eric Westam and Timothy Noakes and Dr. Dannenberg, and like, wow.
Well, you've wowed us, that's for certain. Listen, I wish you every success with the book and everything you're doing. It's always great when I hear your voice on podcasts because you show up regularly, so it's great that you're doing so well with this. And it sounds like the YouTube channel could be a great resource for a lot of people here. Just one would imagine.
I hope so. I mean, I call it, my motto is keto without the crazy. Yes. So if you want simple, straightforward information, if you go to the channel and you go through all the videos, some of my earliest videos are the most basic place to start. So I would say if you're new to this, go way back to the beginning and watch like the first few videos.
Fantastic. Okay, well, Amy, thank you. That was very, very kind of you. Thanks for giving us your time. By the way, where are you actually physically in America? Where are you based?
I'm in North Carolina. I was born and raised in New York, but now I live in North Carolina.
Wow, nice one. Okay, well, listen, take care. Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Bye now. Bye-bye.